All right, so this is part 4. This is gonna have to be our last and final portion of this game. So we have a second level, and the boss is harder in the second level. So we created a brand new object for that. Other ways that we can make this more difficult is, of course, to make different objects or level 2 duplicates for the other things. So, for example, let's say the monsters. Let's create the monsters to be harder to defeat, right? So let's duplicate that as well. We're going to right-click monster in the objects, and we're going to duplicate the monster. Now we're going to call this obj monster2, and we're going to keep all the same stuff, all right? Now I want to, for this one, I want to talk about, like, what if we want an object to have a local variable? So let's say that these second level monsters, we have to hit like twice or maybe even 3 times before they die. What if I want a health for each one of these monsters? Right? Well, we can do that by creating a local variable. So we're going to try that here and make it kind of simple, but I want to get the kind of idea out there. So what we want to do, so again, if we went to score here and we looked at all these variables right here, we could say that these monsters, look, they're going to have their own health. So each one of these little monsters in level 2, you know, they're going to have a health of 2, and once we shoot them twice, then they're going to die, right? So how do we kind of take care of that? In this case, we wouldn't want to use any of these variables in the bar on the right. These are all global variables, and they can really only be used once. Since we're going to use this for every single little object that, you know, is created, it's going to be a local variable. And so we're going to create a variable for each one of these. So think about in Scratch when you created your own variable for that object, it stayed with that object. So if I created multiple objects, that variable was there for every object. So what we want to do is create a variable for this object. And if you go to control, you can see there is variables right here. One way to do this is simply to, so in the create, we're going to go ahead and use this variable, this first button. I'm going to right click this and it says set variable. So we can basically, and it says set variable, we're not even define, it doesn't give us an option here to like define the variable. But when we set the variable, it will basically create it for us. Okay? So let's say this is going to be a local variable for every monster, and so we're going to call this, let's make it specific. So we're going to say monster health. The monster health is going to be this variable, and I'm going to initiate this to, let's say, 2. So every monster now in this create is going to have what's called a monster health, and that will be a local variable to every single monster. It won't be global. So I'm going to say OK on that. So we're going to set the monster health to 2. So then we're going to adjust the behavior of what happens with this fireball, right? So if the monster gets hit by a fireball, right, we want to take away from its health. So what we're going to do here is, let's go through the actions here. So when the monster gets hit by a fireball, we set our score to 10. Okay, that's great. We play a sound. All right, that's great. We destroy the instance of, in this case, we destroy the instance of the monster right here. Now we don't want to do that yet, right? We do want to destroy the instance of the fireball for sure. But the other thing we want to do is just simply subtract from our health. So what we're going to do is in our variables now, right, we're going to set our variable, and we're going to have to remember what we call this variable. We're going to have to say monster health. We're going to have to call it the same thing. And let's just say -1. We're going to take away 1 from this monster health. We're going to make it relative. Okay, we're going to subtract 1 from the monster health, and we're going to say okay. So we're going to subtract 1, and maybe I want to put this like up on the top. I think that just kind of makes logical sense, that we add some to our score, we take away health from the monster, and then now where we have this destroying the instance, so that is right, this one right here. No, not that one. This one right here, where we are destroying the instance of self. We don't want that to run unless the health is down to 0, unless we've actually hit it 2 times, or we can make it 3 times, whatever you want, right? So this is where we're going to have an if statement. We're going to have to run a test. And so see with these variables here, we're going to test this variable, or we're basically going to put an if statement here. And so I'm going to put an if. You can see the if statement pops in there. And we're going to say if, now we can type in whatever variable we want, which again, typing, or the how you spell things matters here. We're going to have to make sure we don't make little mistakes. So now we're going to say monster health if the monster health equals 0. And again, I like to do this. I'm going to say less than, let's try less than 1. Because sometimes when we do equals and a person's score is going down rapidly, sometimes we miss it and the game loop doesn't catch up, and then we get to like negative, and then it never equals 0, so it never dies. So if we say less than 1, that'll make sure this thing is working. So I'm going to say if, right? There's my if statement. Whenever I have an if statement, I just out of habit, I'm going to indent my code. I'm going to put a block here. If the health is less than 1, then I want to destroy the instance, which I think is this one right here. I'm going to put it inside that block. Now I want to make sure that this is the correct thing. So if I click in it, this applies to self. That's the monster, not the fireball. Now there's so much in Gamemaker that you can do, and we're only scratching the surface of like some of these very basic things here. Oh, let me get rid of that. If you go to draw, is this an effect? Yes, it is. So if you go to draw, there's kind of some cool little things that are built into Gamemaker, like these little effects. So draw, you go to other, you can create an effect for like an explosion, just something kind of fun to do that's already in Gamemaker. Let's say that if the monster actually dies, we create an effect right here. So we're going to drop this effect in there, and there's tons of them, right? There's a bunch of effects that are pre-built. I'm going to keep it as an explosion. Let's kind of see what that looks like. And then we want to make this relative. We want to make this relative to where that monster died. And we can change the color of it. You know, this is all something that you can maybe try when you're testing your code. I'm going to make it yellow. So it's going to die. It's going to go to 0, 0. And we're going to say OK on this. We're going to say OK. Now, we have to adjust this. This is something that you have to be aware of. This is my level 2 right here, right? My monster 2 now has to change, right? So, sorry, not monster. We already changed our monster 2. Our boss 2, our second level boss, has to change. Let's go back into boss. Now, if we go to the behavior of the boss and we go to the step function, notice what's happening. We have 1 out of 15. We're creating a monster. We don't want to create a monster. We want to create a monster 2, our second version of that. It's a different object which has different behaviors altogether. So I'm going to click in here and I'm going to change this to monster 2. And I'm going to say OK. Now that's going to make my game way harder because I'm going to have to shoot it a couple times for this thing to die. And again, changing the numbers up right now, you might not want to have 1 out of 15 now, because now they're going to fire off pretty quickly. So just for testing purposes, okay, this is a strategy that we can use. This is probably something that I should have done before. Just for testing purposes, I'm going to change this chance to 1 out of 100, and make it just kind of go 1 out of 100. Oh, actually, yeah, no, let's try that. 1 out of 100, and then I'm going to say okay on that, and then I'm going to go to monster 1, or sorry, I'm going to go to boss 1, and go to the step. And remember, that was 1 out of 25. I'm going to make that even, easier than that. I'm going to make it 1 out of 150. So for testing purposes, this thing is going really, really slow. So I'm going to make the first level really easy. It's 1 out of 150. We're only going to get a monster every few seconds, etc. The other thing I'm going to do, just for testing purposes, right? I don't want to have to play my game and get up to 200 to go to the next level. So I'm going to change up these controllers. So this controller right here, if we go to the step, right, if score is larger than 250, go to the next room. Well, I don't want that. I'm going to say if score is larger than, let's just say 30, right? So it's really fast. I'm going to say okay. All right, so that's just something that you can do. I see a lot of people, including myself sometimes, we kind of get into our game and we set up the parameters how we're going to want it eventually, and then when we test our game, it's like, oh, let me play this game for another 3 minutes just so I can test one little feature. Well, dial down those parameters so you can test it really easily, right? Let's go ahead and see if this works here to some extent. I'm going to hit space. Now this should be really easy, right? Got one, collect this, and I should go to the next level. So now I'm on level 2, and now I should have these guys right here. And you can see I have to hit it twice. If I hit it once, his health goes down, but he's not killed. I have to actually hit him twice. So that part of it is working. And the explosion here is kind of not really where I want it to be. I'd want to maybe want to adjust that so that it's better. But so far the logic of this code is working. Of course, I don't advance to my windscreen at all here. Okay, so this is an example. This is an important distinction here, is that when I am using the score, variables, like in, say, Dragon right here, when I'm using these variables right here that are built in, score, lives, health, those are variables, just like any other variable, but they are tagged as global variables, which mean in Scratch, it would be the same idea as this is a variable for all sprites, not just this one sprite, right? So these are global variables. I want to use these only for really big things in my game. Things that, like the score of my main character, right? That's not going to change. If I want to use that throughout the whole game, and it's going to span across multiple levels and things like that, then I can use these global variables here. I also used health for the dragon as well, and that was global. But when I went into Monster 2, then I created my own variable. I didn't use the variables that were on the side here, because this variable was going to be for this object only. It was going to be a local variable, or we might call it an object variable or an instance variable. And so in order to create those variables, I actually had to create it myself, right, in the create event, and we made just whatever you want to call it, we created it there, but that health is going to only be for that object. So when 100 monsters come out of the boss, there's going to be 100 separate variables that only pertain to those objects called monster health, right? And that's why you have this behavior that's separate, that I have to shoot these monsters twice before they go away. So that's the difference between a local variable and a global variable, and that's a very important concept in this class and in programming, is that we have that. Now let's finish up some stuff here, and as soon as you can kind of see, as soon as we open one can of worms and show one thing, you might be thinking of all these other things you can do in your game, right? But let's kind of wrap this up. So we also need a controller for level 2. We need a controller for level 2, which we don't have right now. We have a cave controller, and remember, if I'm making multiple levels, I'll probably want to start to rename this so that it makes more sense to me. I'm just going to say, instead of cave controller, I'm going to say level 1 controller, because now I'm thinking I'm going to make a bunch of levels here, and so I want to name these appropriately. But I am going to create, let's create another object, and let's call this obj object level 2 controller. And all we're going to do with this one is, in the event, we're going to create a loop in the game loop in the step event right here. We're simply going to check our score, right? So we just want to make this bigger than the second. This is just one way to do it. So I'm going to go to score, and I'm going to test my score. So let's say that if the score is, larger than, now let's say 100. Again, this is another easy way to scale up the difficulty of your game, is by adjusting all these values. So if the score is greater than 100, I'm going to indent my code here, and I'm going to go to the next room, which is going to be my win screen. And that's it. So that's all I'm going to do for this controller for now. Remember, I have to go back to my level 2. I'm going to click on level 2, and I have to add that new controller. I don't want the first level controller in there, because then what's going to happen there? It's going to basically perform, you might get an infinite loop in there, because it's going to keep thinking that it has a score above like only 30, and it's going to keep switching rooms constantly. But let's go ahead and add controller, so level 2 controller right here. We're going to add that at the top right part of the screen, and we're going to say okay. Now let's do one more thing, because this is kind of an easy thing to do. Let's make the baby, and you can actually see that in the sprites that we have an evil baby. So kind of like the boss is going to be trying to trick us and giving us like a clone or a slightly different baby that we might be tricked into collecting. But let's not even go there. Let's just make a level 2 baby that is faster, right? So maybe I decide, so this baby right here, I'm going to duplicate the baby. And I'm just going to name this obj, this is going to be baby 2. Baby 2. The only difference that I want in level 2 babies is that when it moves to the left, right, I'm just going to up the speed. Maybe I'll make it 16. And maybe I'll make it so the babies like start moving diagonally across. Well, I can't do that because I would have to make sure that it bounces off the walls, so we'd have to add more. So let's keep it simple, and I'm just going to add the speed. Man, 16 will be fast. Maybe I'll just go 12. There. So I only adjusted one thing, a very small thing. I just made the babies faster. So I'm going to say okay on that. Now, I know you can see here we're starting to make a lot of objects, right? We have to remember that now in boss 2, if we go back to boss 2 and we go to the step, that boss 2 is not going to be spitting out, this normal object baby. We're going to switch this to baby 2 instead of baby 1. Or not boss 2. baby 2. We're going to say okay on that. All right. So again, there's basically an unlimited amount of possibilities that you can do here. Remember, you don't want to create. You usually want to start your game off kind of simple. Like if you do have a first level, you're kind of getting the user engaged with the game, kind of letting them experience the controls, getting good at it, and then you're going to progress the game. So, and then you want it to get harder. You don't want it to get harder too fast, too slow. This is a lot of testing that you're going to have to do and adjusting the numbers. I can tell you right now that this game that we put together, it's not optimal in terms of the numbers that we chose and the difficulty progression. But anyways, let's test it out. So I have my first level, which is, simple right now. I'm just going to go ahead and get to the next level. Now I'm in level 2. And you can see these babies are going faster. And it's going to take me longer to kill these monsters. And I won pretty easily because, remember, I'm just testing my game. But that's just yet another thing of how you can kind of adjust the parameters of your game. Now the babies are shooting out faster. You can basically change anything you want there. You just have so many different options. Okay. So this tutorial here, we could go on for days and days, because we could just keep on adding like fun little things in here. We could change the backgrounds, we could change the boss. We haven't even made it so I can shoot the boss. Maybe I can shoot the boss and it has just a really big health, and if I'm able to attack that boss enough, I can just get rid of the boss. I mean, so many different things. One thing that I want to wrap up with here though is, let's say that you're creating level 3 level 4. Let's say you have a lot of levels and you're starting to get a lot of objects. Like right now, I'm already starting to get a lot of objects. In Gamemaker, it's easy to group these things together. So you can make folders, you can make groups in your objects, and I would recommend that if you're getting to have a lot of things in there. So what I want you to try is right-click on objects and hit Create Group. And I'm just going to say level 2. I don't know, level 2 objects. Or maybe just level 2. And what I can do there is I can drag in all these level 2 specific objects into this group. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it in there. What happens is that it just kind of indents it in that folder. So I have baby 2, I'm going to put it in there. I have monster 2, I'm going to put it in there. I have boss 2, I'm going to put it in there. And if you wanted to make, I'm going to rename this to just level 2. We could certainly, and then our controller as well. We already put that in there. So we have level 2 objects. The nice thing about this is that it will clear up what we can see on the screen. So I have level 2. I can now collapse that, and I don't see all those objects in there. I can make a group for level 1 as well. If it were me, I would be doing this because I don't like to see so many things on my screen. I like to sort of organize your code and organize the objects and things that you have. So if I made a level 1, let's put in the level 1 controller. I didn't rename these as level 1 characters, but I'm still going to put them in there. This is the level 1 boss. This is the level 1 monster. This is the level, we got the level 1 controller. I can throw the dragon in there if I want. The baby, etc. Okay, so this just gives you, I would highly recommend to make groups once you, I mean, you could do it right away, but especially when you start creating lots and lots of objects, if you get to that and you're creating multiple levels and you need to keep track of these things, groups are going to be important. So now I have level 1, level 2, I can expand these different, basically duplicates, but they have different behaviors in there. You can do the same thing with any of your folders and assets over here on the left-hand side. You can make groups. All right, so that is, again, there's so much more we can do here, right? And that's where you guys are going to think about different games that you can create. right? And you're going to get a chance to think, design your game, come up with a story, and start creating something of your own. So, and I'm just thinking about all the different types of games you can make, right? So, one of the games that my kids play a lot on my phone, kind of similar to this type of game where you're kind of shooting and progressing, and it's not a left to right, it's like a top down, kind of a classic. I'm going to bring it over to the screen here. Something like this Galaxy Attack. Right, so we're like, shooting different guys, there's different enemies, and this is like at fast speed, so it's going really fast. But you can see after they collect certain objects, then they get better weapons, they get better, they can shoot more bullets and stuff like that, and get upgrades. And I can see something like this, which is what we created, create a similar type of logic game. Now, probably not something to this scale, but really, it's the same thing that we have been doing. You have collision detections, you have scores, you have little explosions, and the logic of it is pretty simple. Again, I don't want you to feel like you're bogged down to a certain type of game. I want it to have certain aspects of what we did with collision detection and whatnot. But again, sky's the limit. Think about what you'd want to create. If you are unsure, then just talk to me about it. All right. Happy coding.